We'd like to welcome Rabbi Kalmenson to From the Inside Out. It is great to have you here. I have your books all over my house. There's Seeds of Wisdom 1 and 2, A Time to Heal, Positivity Bias, People of the World. And now Rabbi Kalmenson has come out with a new book, On Purpose. And we just started skimming through it, and there's a lot of wisdom. You always have a lot of wisdom to share, and that is because you researched the Lubavitcher Rebbe's wisdom. When I have a question, I like to know what the Rebbe would say. And so we're very honored to have you here to hear from you what you've researched on the Rebbe's wisdom. And I always love in your books that you make it practical. You bring it down to a paragraph that is deep and meaningful, yet it sounds simple. It's like, oh, that makes sense. And so we want to thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. It's a privilege. Thank you.
And I thought we would start off by asking you, because you write so much about positivity and how to live a purposeful life being positive. Many people equate positivity with being naive or being insensitive to what's going on in the world or in somebody else's life. So what would you say to that person who says, I know, you're being positive, but you might just be a little bit naive about what's really going on?
So I actually see that as two separate questions. One of them is you're being naive, and the other is insensitive. So I'll try to address both.
Yeah, it's true. It is two different things.
Yeah, no, people who ask good questions, very good questions, have many questions within those questions.
Yeah.
And I think I want to break them apart because there's two ideas that I think might be useful. So first of all, whenever someone asks me, what is positivity bias? Like, how would you frame it? What's the genre? Where do you find it in a bookstore? Is it in pop psychology, for example, which is, I think, the go-to people immediately think of. And, I thought about it a lot when I was writing it, because I was trying to write it for the most universal audience, including even a non-Jewish world. And it struck me again and again that it really isn't a book of psychology. It's a book of theology. So it's not positive psychology, it's positive theology. And there's a very big difference. Because positive psychology is wonderful. Actually, there's some Jewish people who invented the whole concept of positive psychology, Martin Seligman, and many others. And the short of it is they were studying not the ailments of the psyche, but how to actually preventatively strengthen, bolster one's psyche so they don't come to all those unhealthy and often toxic conditions that require immediate and sometimes urgent acute help, which is just a Jewish way of thinking in itself. And parenthetically, something the Rebbe again and again talked about, preventative. It's a fascinating theme. Actually, I wish I could have included more chapters in Positivity Bias. I have probably 5 or 6 that I didn't include. Maybe one day there'll be a sequel. But one of them was all about preventative. Again and again, whether it's crime, whether it's mental health, in so many areas the Rebbe spoke about how preventative is so much more efficient, not even from a metaphysical point of view, but just efficiency. Because once someone gets ill, it's so much harder to heal them from that existent condition. In any event, back to the question. So positive psychology works. The data is staggering. I read research from the BBC. The findings show that a person with a positive outlook lives between 11 and 15% longer than their pessimistic peers. That's outstanding. If I came to the market and I said today, I have a pill that if you take, you can live between 11 and 15% longer, I'd become an instant international sensation. And the short of it is, for so many reasons, it helps from the immune system and so many other physiological things to psychological things. It's a more efficient and it's a more effective and resilient way to live. But in the end, psychology is just psychology, which means to say these are ideas that are utilitarian in their effect, but not necessarily reflect the truth of reality. And therefore, people who are a bit more cynical, skeptical, consider themselves more rational or, in quotation marks, realistic, have a very hard time with that. Because they say, I'd rather live with less positivity as long as I'm living in the real world. I'm not willing, as it were, to pull the wool over my eyes and don these rose-colored glasses just because of the effects. I respect that, by the way. They have integrity. They're not willing to sell out to what they perceive to be childish, elementary ideas, or in the best case scenario, ideas that are helpful and useful, but do not reflect the reality of their lives. Positivity bias is so different than that. Positive psychology is literally a map of the universe. It's a map of reality. It's a map of the psyche from the divine perspective. That's vastly different. It's saying, you think you are living in reality because of X, Y, and Z, but you're not. And the Rebbe shows us what reality really is. The reality, again, reality of our own selves, right? So often, this is also interesting, people who suffer from depression very often have a distorted sense of self. They're not actually seeing themselves accurately. They're seeing themselves in a distorted way, meaning to say they actually have, by objective measures, much greater abilities than they think they do. However, this condition causes them to focus predominantly or disproportionately on their lackings. And that presents themselves to themselves as being severely lacking, when in fact they have much greater powers and strength than they even imagine themselves to have. So what is reality? What is the reality of their state? And that's really the key point here. Again and again, the Rebbe teaches us in so many areas from the human condition, but also the arc of history. Where are we in the world? So many times the Rebbe read or decoded what was happening in the world in a way that the average frum Jew, or lahavdil, even the parts of the population that were conservative in values, looked at as the beginning of the end. You know, the 60s, 70s, there was a very big moment, the breakdown in organized religion and what we would call today respect. You know, this new age thinking of, you know, the arbiter of truth, right and wrong is how I feel about it. All of that stuff begins. I once heard Dennis Prager point to the 60s as the beginning point, the departure point of that. And the entire general religious world, and in particular the Jewish religious world, especially Jewish leadership, was bemoaning the fact of what we would call Yeridas Hadeiros, this degeneration of generations. And they said that, you know, pages turned, and we were never able to reclaim, you know, what we had. And the Rebbe looks in it and says, you're misreading it. Do you understand the opportunity, the potential of this younger generation? They're sick and tired of conformity. They're sick and tired of superficiality. They're sick and tired of a Judaism that's a social construct, that lacks any depth of spirituality and authenticity and integrity and ownership. All of those things that today are ubiquitous and we celebrate as values and virtues, literally those seeds were planted at that time with the breakdown of this organized religion. You know, I'll never forget, I heard a talk from one of the greatest speakers in the Jewish world. I won't say his name because I'm about to critique it a little bit. So I have to be careful. You know, I respect him to no end, but...
Well, you've got a chapter here about watching your words.
Exactly right. So he was once bemoaning the fact that basically there's a shrinking center in general, but in the Jewish world. He said it used to be there were people in the middle. Most of the Jewish people in the traditional, so-called traditional mainstream Jewish world were a center. And he said now kids are either leaving religion entirely or they're becoming extremely religious, more right. And it struck me that that's actually an amazing thing. What do I mean by that? What is the middle very often? The middle is a place of compromise. It's sanctified. It's a sanctified compromise. It says this is a place where you can be comfortably and you can inhabit permanently. When someone rejects that and goes to the left, when a child runs away from that kind of Yiddishkeit, what they're really saying is, this doesn't do it for me. I'm not going to come to a shul just because I need to be seen. That's not what's going to bring me to a shul. Or just because my father did it, my grandfather did. No, I want something deeper. They're leaving, unfortunately, because they don't find it. And sadly, and this is the major shame, they're looking elsewhere for what they really should be finding in our institutions, in our moises, in our shuls, and whatever it might be. And that very same thing is pushing people to the right. Why are they going deeper? Why are they becoming more devout, more religious, more tzaddish, whatever term you want to use? Because they know there's something more. That's powerful. So the Rebbe diagnosed that generation. What I'm trying to do is is extract and codify some of the Rebbe's wisdom that could be speaking to the times we live in, because all of it does. And what I would give to be at a Farbrengen today, with the Rebbe speaking about so many of the things that we're seeing today, I'm sure the Rebbe would have the most amazing things to say about what some of these really difficult and painful experiences so many parents are going through with their children, so many elements of our communities are struggling with, etc. I'm certain the Rebbe would have diagnosed it in a way that would just leave us transformed. The beauty is that we have mashpiyim. The beauty is that we have the Rebbe's teachings. And so we can make leaps, we can make connections. It's all there. Nevertheless, there are certain things that I sometimes wonder about what the Rebbe would say about this, that, and the other.
Because some things are unprecedented.
That's correct. Well, at least some manifestations of things were not present. But I do think that the seeds, the axioms, the principles speak to all.
Well,
all
are
matters.
some things unprecedented? For example, what's going on today in Israel? Let's say,
Which aspect?
I'm saying, oh, well, I guess that's a whole nother discussion altogether, but I'm saying, can we take the Rebbe's wisdom and apply it to now? For example, even knowing, I don't know, anything, Shleima Saaretz.
100. That's a great. Well, your father was
Yeah.
one of the great proponents of unadulterated. The Rebbe's views unadulterated. Actually, that's one area where it's very easy to see how the Rebbe is speaking to the times. You just have to watch some of the videos that the Rebbe talking to previous peace agreements and other such things. I just saw today a clip from Elkanah Shmutkin, Rabbi Shmutkin, about the Saudi deal. I don't know if you've seen it. Fascinating. I don't want to get into all of that right now because it's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
The Rebbe's views on Israel and how, in some of those areas, you see the line. You see, it's almost as if the Rebbe is speaking literally to our times. Not even we need to extrapolate. But just to come back to the positive theology point.
Yeah.
So there you have an amazing situation where the Rebbe is basically deciphering what's happening in front of people's eyes. They don't see it. They see it in the exact opposite manner. So what was the reality of the 60s? Was it the beginning of the end, or was it the beginning of a new beginning? And you could say the same about so many different areas of the Rebbe's teaching. So that's really what positivity bias is all about. It's about really exhibiting, unpacking, showcasing, and hopefully, again, codifying, because it's a key word of what I try to do, the ways in which the Rebbe teaches us about the truth of reality.
Right.
And that's something vastly different. To your second point.
Yeah.
In
You're
sensitivity.
saying sensitivity.
There was no one in the universe, in history, that I know of who had the sensitivity that our Rebbe had. No one comes close. You see it often, actually, when I research the Time to Heal, which is the Rebbe's wisdom and teachings for in response to loss and tragedy. You see how the Rebbe, that's where you really see the two almost competing values and virtues: positivity, hope, optimism, alongside deep understanding, empathy, witnessing. We would say today, receiving, being in the presence of all of that. The Rebbe synthesized those two like no one else. And I hoped that in the book, Time to Heal, I was able to convey a little bit about that. But what's very interesting is I have a folder on my computer. It's called Additions to, and then each of the books. As I go through life and I encounter more and more, I take things and I put them into those folders. And in the Additions to A Time to Heal, there's so much more material, including an amazing, amazing story that I just saw recently from Jem, where there was a boy who lost his father, and the Rebbe asked him, "Tell me, how did it happen? Where were you? What were your feelings?" And basically the Rebbe guided him to share for the very first time in his life something that caused him to just fall apart in the moment, but was later part of what we would call reconstructive surgery. It's so tender. It's beyond amazing. And that's, so you see that the first thing is to validate, to empathize. This idea of toxic positivity is where you invalidate and you make someone doubt what they're feeling. It's terrible. Feelings are natural. Hashem designed them. I once heard Rabbi Yossi Jacobson, one of the great teachers and communicators of Hasidus and B'chlal, Yahadas, and he said that Alter Rebbe Tanya talks about feelings as children, right? The midas, they're considered the children of Aveim, Chacham Bina. What do we do with our own children? Today we know so much more about the importance of this. Maybe in early generations our parents didn't do that. It's true. In early generations parents said, "Oh, what you're feeling, stop dwelling on that. Go, move on, get past it." Today we know, no, the very first thing you do is you just receive it. You allow it to come out. You allow it to manifest. You allow it to be present. And then it goes. And then you move to the next thing. Right? That's a very critical theme that you see again and again in the Rebbe's behavior, let alone in the Rebbe's Torah. So that's, I think, to the second point. So super important not to invalidate, because that's cruel. Then you become an accessory to the pain they're feeling. You almost facilitate. You're invalidating their experience, and that's actually, as I write about in Time to Heal, it's further exacerbating the problem, because you're just pushing it deeper into them. And I think the Rebbe's view on this, and we see this a lot, and I recorded it and documented it in the book. The Rebbe believed that loss and pain and tragedy, it stays with us unless it's excavated, unless it's addressed. Otherwise, it will come out at a later point, but it will be terrible. It will be toxic. It will be completely chaotic, disrupted in a way that you won't even know where it's coming from or how to deal with it. It's so much worse. So therefore, right away, I'll validate it. That's the Shiva system, but you see with the Rebbe very clearly. So, so there's going to be a void. What you're going to do with that is really the reaction, the response is where I think that's where the redemptive aspect of the challenges we have in life come into play. But to invalidate is a very very superficial understanding of how pain works.
So in a nutshell, the naivety aspect is that perhaps the people who feel they're being realistic, it's not really the reality, it's deeper than that.
Yes.
And then the sensitivity aspect is being that you need to validate.
100%.
But then you can also be positive.
Yes, exactly. And a person has to be ready for that, right? They have to come to it. Just to the previous point, just to tie a little bow on that, the Rebbe saw reality not binary, not this or that. I think this is a very critical point. There are layers. The Rebbe didn't discount psychology. The Rebbe didn't discount psychoanalysis. The Rebbe didn't discount Freud and Adler. He didn't. He just said they didn't dig deep enough. There's an actual story with Rabbi Steinsaltz.
What is the deepest layer?
The deepest layer is what we learn and hopefully internalize in our systems of thought, chassidus, neshama, that divine essence, right? As one philosopher put it, we aren't physical beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a physical experience. That one paradigm shift, that's essential. It's transformative. The thing is, many people at least, even if they do know it, they don't live that. And that's hopefully what these books are here to do, is just to present, to frame. I think a lot of it is framing. One of the things people tell me a lot of times is, I know a lot of what you wrote about in the book, but I didn't see it until you just pointed it out. You drew the contours. I think that's one of the things that I hope to do in these books. And that's why I focus on one theme at a time. Because, to write about what the Rebbe taught is an endless, limitless, infinite task. But what we could do is take one piece and try to put it together. And here too, on purpose, I can't tell you how much I had to leave out. It's heartbreaking, but at some point you just have to say, this is what's readable, digestible, and that's it.
Right. So before you move on to On Purpose, I want to ask you one more question about positivity. If the Rebbe believes that we are inherently positive, and if we have a negative view of the world, or if we're realists, let's say, it's just because we've moved away from who we truly are, from our essence. So why do you think there's so many people out there who have a hard time being positive? I'd say it's a nice chunk of people who aren't naturally inherently positive. Like if I'm thinking of the people I know who have a positive skew of the world, I could just count on my fingers. So why is that?
So I actually touched on in the book a little bit. There's actually, positivity bias is actually a play on a real social scientific term, which is negativity bias. Negativity bias is a real thing. Social scientists say that from an evolutionary point of view, in order to survive, we had to fixate on the things that were either going wrong or could go wrong at any given moment. So visualize for a moment you're living thousands of years ago somewhere in the jungles or wherever it might be, and you're busy enjoying your berries. The tiger could come out of the bushes and eat you alive. So you have to be constantly scanning the world and your reality for either the things that were wrong or could go wrong at any given moment. And that's a survival technique and mechanism, and that's brilliant. And Hashem, part of the way we were built, and so many of the things that we deal with, I'm talking about inner strife, defense mechanisms, escapism, denial, all those kinds of things that we look at, and we put on our psychologist hat and we say, oh, those are negative. They're actually amazing gifts from Hashem that allowed us to survive trauma, and without them we couldn't survive, etc. But the negativity bias was a wonderful thing, but I think it's a little dated. What do I mean by that? We now have transferred that same hypervigilance and anxiety that we once needed in order to survive life and death situations into relatively beyond minor areas of life that are completely non-lethal and that are really just about 1 degree or 2 degrees more or less adjusting our comfort levels, convenience, whatever. So the point is, we have something inside of us, and to ignore that is to ignore a certain part of us. So that part is real, and that part of us served us really well, but today it doesn't. And therefore, I believe, this is me speaking, that the Rebbe's shitta here is to slowly begin to adjust from that negativity to positive bias. So the people who have a negativity bias are completely normal and natural. That's unfortunately, to some extent, the baseline. I don't think many people are born, well, children are generally, I think, quite positive and joyful. The Rebbe once pointed out, if you want to see the real state of a person, look at the children, the way they're just in flow, in the moment, and so on. But they're just joyful. They don't need a reason to be happy when they're early on, but they're taught. I like to say, but I don't think it's etymologically true, that the word adulterated has the word adult in it, because somehow as we become adults, things become a little more gray and tainted. The point is, negativity biases has some very positive uses as well, because if a person doesn't have that, in other words, if they're not focused on things that could be better or could be bettered, then they'll be complacent and they'll become extremely comfortable where they are. Everything is good. That's not a way to live either. So it's about adjusting. It's about adjusting from the negativity bias to the positivity bias, and in that way, I think once internalized, and not all at once, it's a process, it's a journey over time. Really, these ideas make a very real difference. I'll share with you one example. There's a chapter called Dwelling on the Positive. I spoke
in
once.
this new book? Or?
No, in Positivity Bias. I spoke at the JLI retreat one year, and a very nice woman who my wife knew from school came over to us. I think she was in her mid-30s. And she said, basically, I have to tell you something. I said, what is it? She said, I read Positivity Bias when it came out. And then she said, about a month or so ago, I fell into a very deep depression, very like a black hole. I couldn't get out of it. Nothing I was doing was helping. Nothing anyone could tell me would help. And she said, at some point, I just picked it up again, and I started reading it. And she said, I decided, based on the chapter to dwell the positive, I decided to write a journal. And each day I would write something positive that happened that day, except that on day 2, I would write 2 things. On day 3, 3, and so on. She said, today's day, I think it was day 45 or day 50.
And she wrote 50 things.
Could you imagine? So she said, you don't understand. She said, instead of all day scanning for the things that aren't going well, for all the people who harmed me, for all the grievances that are real, that happen, for all the ways I was overlooked and ignored, I am now actually looking out for the good things that happen around. And she said, you would be shocked and amazed at how many amazing things happen around you, except that you just don't notice. The way in which the psyche is designed, based on those years of evolution, is that good things fall through the memory like a sieve much quicker than bad things. Anyway, so I thought that was an amazing story. I don't know where she's holding now, because this was 3 years ago. I don't think it's sustainable.
Right.
The point isn't that you keep, but at least if you're in a dark place, start it, and then that could lift you, and that's the way it is. It's to live. That's on. So that's where I think we could move from one place to the next, and that's one of the critical ideas. In the introduction, I share one story, which for me is like the cornerstone of the book. And no, I'm back. I'm just wrapping up that point. So, if there's a story that encapsulates the whole book, it would be this particular point. The premise of the book. The Rebbe, researching the Rebbe is extremely difficult, because the Rebbe shared very little, very, very little about his own personal life. I mean, you can count on 2 hands or more how many times the Rebbe actually talked about his own personal life. Yes, very few times the Rebbe would mention his parents, but also very few. But the Rebbe once told a chassid, Rabbi Yunik, he said that I worked on myself to see things positively. Otherwise, I couldn't have survived. That's incredible. The Rebbe sharing, perhaps maybe naturally, the positivity the Rebbe exuded and exhibited and projected every moment was something that he acquired through hard work. I worked on myself. And otherwise, I couldn't have survived. And this is, I think, something that people don't realize. When you just look at a video of the Rebbe for Ring, and the way the Rebbe takes his arms and he swings, and the whole 770 as one, there's nothing like it. You would think that the Rebbe lived a life of peace, of privilege, everything worked well for him. The Rebbe had, by objective standards, an extremely difficult life. The Rebbe lived through World War I, World War II, a typhus epidemic, a refugee crisis. The Rebbe's father, as you know, was taken from him, forced into captivity. He was tortured. He passed away from that. The Rebbe, I came across something the Rebbe once said. The Rebbe wrote to his father saying, I'll never forgive myself for not having done more to get you out. And the Rebbe couldn't have done anything. The Rebbe was busy escaping for his own life. He got into the last boat, Sirpa Pinto. We know. So it wasn't like the Rebbe could have done more, but that's what the Rebbe carried with him, just so we understand. And then, just on a practical level, the Rebbe addressed childlessness in others, so we can address it too. The Rebbe The Rebbe lived a life with it. He wasn't blessed for whatever reason. These are things that are beyond us, way beyond us. The very individual who gave the brachas to probably tens of thousands, maybe more, to have children through the will of the Eibusher, which we will never fathom, wasn't blessed to have biological children.
Did he ever address that in the Farbrengens at all?
About himself?
Talk? Yeah, about infertility.
Did the Rebbe ever talk to others who were going through it?
Yeah.
What the Rebbe did a lot of times, and I actually included him on purpose, is the Rebbe would lovingly admonish people who said, my life is miserable, and the Rebbe would say, how could you say your life is miserable? You are blessed with children. Just end the point. Before you get into all the other myriad blessings you have, there's a woman who wrote to the Rebbe, and I included it on purpose. She says to the Rebbe, I feel lost and aimless. I feel like I don't have a purpose in life. The Rebbe tells her, the answer to your question is in the letter itself, because you wrote that you have children. And the Rebbe said, how much more? That is your purpose. The first place to look for purpose is within the family, and there's a whole chapter called Family First, and that's, maybe we'll get into that a little bit more. But the Rebbe also carried the pain, quite literally, of millions of people over the years. Where did people turn to when they had a problem? They turned to the Rebbe immediately. The Rebbe would say, a number of occasions, people would write to him, and the Rebbe would say, months later, a year later, knew what happened with the major challenge that threatened your well-being. And they said it worked out. The Rebbe said, so why didn't you tell me? The Rebbe once said, I have 2 drawers in my desk. One is for all of the requests for health and the brokenness, the nachas, and all the challenges that people have. And the other one is for all the b'suras tevis. The Rebbe said, the one with negative news is filled to the top. The one with b'suras tevis is empty. So the Rebbe carried it. The Rebbe internalized it. It really affected the Rebbe. And we know this also even physiologically.
Which means we need to share more good news.
That's exactly right. By the way, Rabbi Kotlarsky, blessed memory of Olav Shalom, he would talk all the time about sharing b'suras tevis, something that I, for one, could do much better at. It's a natural thing. It goes back to the negativity bias. What's on our mind and what impacts our minds most deeply, I think that's the critical point, are the challenges that we have. When they go away, do we stop and devote at least the same amount of attention and focus and consciousness to the good? So that's really part of the theme of positivity bias. So that, and the Rebbe said, I worked on myself. So that Rebbe who lived through all of that, and I don't think any of us lived through things that can even compare in the main in terms of the arc of a lifetime. I'm not, Chas Hashem, discounting the very immense and excruciating Herculean pain that people experience in their lives, but to step out for a moment and analyze the source of such positivity, it's clearly the case that from the Rebbe's point of view, positivity is not a matter of circumstance, but choice. And it's not a matter of personality, but perspective. And that's where the ideas become extremely relevant to each of us.
I wonder if people who are the most positive people might have also had some of the most difficult situations where they had to harness that and they had to work on that, and that's what really made them more positive. It's
a
an
great
interesting
point.
thing, because there's so many people who are comfortable enough.
Yes.
And maybe that's why so many people are experiencing or have this negative outlook, negative mindset. One of my friend's grandchildren, she's like 7 or 8 years old. My friend told me, she came up to her and she said, I know Mashiach didn't come yet. It's because Galus is too comfortable for us. It's like not bad enough for us to turn around and do what we need to do.
Yes.
But I just wonder, it's not a statement, it's just a...
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, you see, we host a lot of speakers in our community. The Holocaust community? It's a place called Belgravia in central London.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know
London? Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know London well?
I've been there once or twice.
Okay.
Yeah.
First, I'll come back for a visit.
Yeah.
So our Chabad house is on the street of Buckingham Palace. Sorry.
Oh, nice.
Buckingham Palace is on the street of our Chabad house. Okay.
Perspective.
That's where we are.
Yeah.
So
Fancy.
we host a lot of Holocaust survivors. Mm-hmm. It's an amazing thing. Maybe it's just the ones we hosted. I don't know. I've not done a study on this. We've hosted over the past 13 years maybe 220 or 30 speakers. Anyone from Yehuda Avner, Olav Shalom, to the chief rabbi, Rabbi Lau. We just hosted Avigdor Kahalani. He was one of the great war heroes of Israel. He single-handedly changed the course of the Yom Kippur War. These kinds of cultural speakers. And every one of the Holocaust survivors we've hosted were amongst the most positive people I met. So I'm saying, to your point, to your theory. Now, I haven't done a study.
Right.
I wouldn't go so far as to say, you need to go through something so difficult to be positive, or that everyone who goes through something so difficult becomes positive, because it isn't the case.
Right.
People react very differently to trauma, and some people it breaks them.
You
For
were
some
saying
people,
it's perspective.
100%. That's what I'm
so
saying.
a shift in perspective can take a lot of work, or it
Yes.
could just be your natural perspective.
Yeah. Yes, but I think, remember, the key point of the negativity bias is that I think the baseline for most people
You're
is it's
saying
not
that
their
the
natural.
default setting
The default is
is
typically not.
Yeah, but our default, if you go into the soul level.
Yes, that's a brilliant point. If you get to the essence from the point of view of the essence of our souls, 100%, there's no doubt that we would see things in truth as the reality of everything is. 100%. So what we were just describing in terms of negativity bias, that's an ego conscious issue.
Right.
That comes from ego consciousness, okay? And that's, again, the ego is an amazing tool for survival. And we have to recognize that. The nefesh bahamis is helpful.
The animal soul.
The animal
just
soul,
to
exactly.
translate.
Yes, exactly. It literally means the animal, or the animating soul. That's a very real and a very necessary component. The chiddush of the Alter Rebbe Chassidus is exactly this: is don't discount it, don't work with it. There's something there, but recognize that it doesn't define the essence. So, just to say, so again, for some people, pain breaks them, and for other people, it breaks them open.
Right.
It's really just a simple way of putting it. And that, I think, is what hopefully through these teachings one can get to.
Yeah, it can break them, and that break can lead to the opening.
It can, yes. Yeah, I meant it in more binary. I meant it
Right.
more, but yes, beautiful. You keep revealing the essence and the truth of things. But that's yes. Look in the Rebbe's own life. Every time the Rebbe experienced a major loss, that became the springboard for a new campaign. Right?
Like Karen Chamesh.
Yeah, when the Rebbetzin passed away, he came to my father-in-law and said, the day that she passed away, and said he wants to start a Karen, a fund for women
There you go.
who are struggling.
And also, perhaps even more counterintuitively, on the Shleishim, the Rebbe announced the birthday campaign. Right? The Rebbe turned a day of passing into a day that celebrates new life. That was the day. That was the event. The Rebbe started the Rashi Sichos to commemorate his mother, Kol Tiferes Levi Yitzchak, where older men would come and learn. They got a stipend in the memory of his father, and many other such examples. Because for the Rebbe, again, these events, they generate an energy. What you're going to do with that energy is critical, right? That is such a powerful energy that we don't have access to under normal circumstances. It's meant to be the thrust for something new, for something innovative, for something generative, for something creative. That's such a powerful idea. And that becomes the basis for the Rebbe's perspective on loss and tragedy. Again and again, after great moments of loss, the Rebbe took those events and turned them into great moments of rebuilding, of regeneration. From Kfar Chabad and many other examples, which I won't go into now.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of instances where people turn pain into purpose and achieve amazing things.
Exactly.
So let's just say for everyone else, for someone who's picking up the book on purpose, who's searching for that purpose, they want to find their purpose, but there's not necessarily like a strong pain point or something that happened that kind of fueled that desire to create something from the pain. How would you suggest they go about finding their purpose, and or what's like a key takeaway or lesson that you got from this project, from writing this book?
So the first thing I would recommend is to get a hold of a copy.
It's sold out.
That's true. I don't mean it facetiously. I mean it because it really is.
Well, when is the reprinting happening?
It's happening now.
Okay.
There's already 2 planned.
Yeah.
To anticipate. Mitzvah Shem. So, I one of the major premises of the book actually is a letter of the Rivkah Rebbe that he wrote to someone named Tzvi Einbinder, who lived in New Haven, as it happens. It's, I believe, the longest letter the Rivkah Rebbe wrote. That's what someone who was helping me with the research pointed out. And in it, the Rebbe, it's an amazing letter. And basically, the Rivkah Rebbe says, based on the pasuk Zeh Sefer told this Adam, that actually told this Adam the happenings of a person's life is the Sefer, is the book you need to read in order to learn your life's purpose. Such a poetic but powerful idea. And it gives birth to an incredible idea. And that idea is that very often when we look for purpose, we look outside of ourselves, therapists or to gurus or to life coaches or to wisdom traditions to help us discover our purpose in life. But the teaching of Hashgacha Pratis, if translated literally, says that actually you need look no further than your own self. In fact, look into yourself and into your divine inner makeup and constitution, and you will find so many hidden indicators and clues as to your particular purpose. In that letter, the Rivkah Rebbe lays out 10 points. In this book, I expand on that because in the Rebbe's teachings, we find quite a few more than 10. Those are incredibly powerful and incredibly practical.
Which chapter is that where you let us?
It's the middle section of the book. So, for example, your talent. So historically, actually, in the religious Jewish world, talent was not seen as something divinely endowed per se. It wasn't something to follow. In fact, most talents were considered to be potential dangers that might lead you astray. The Rebbe even addresses this when he inspires Mendel Lieberman, the artist. It's an amazing story of regeneration. But the short of it is, the Rebbe tells him he struggled with his artistic instinct and talent and gifts. Why? Because he was raised at a time when art was considered to be a forbidden art form in the religious world. Because, and this is justifiable, there were times throughout history and much of history when art was actually the tool of heresy. It was the groundbreaking tool that pushed the envelope again and again in all areas, and was very often the source of the vulgarization of society and values. So there was a certain natural ambivalence or reluctance, resistance, and even perceived danger in this particular form of self-expression and creativity. But the Rebbe tells Mendel Lieberman the time has come. The Rebbe said, it's true that in previous generations this wasn't, I don't want to misquote, but it wasn't used or something like that. But the Rebbe said, but now the time has come to elevate it. Okay, but let's say music. Eli Lipsker, Olav Hashem, he was the Crown Heights. He represented he had the choir and he led davening by the Rebbe for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and so on. When he was in yeshiva, he was caught taking time off yeshiva and learning music in I think the Juilliard Art of School or something to that effect. And at that time, at least, before expelling a bacher, they had to get permission from the Rebbe. They bring this to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said not only should he be allowed to continue, but the yeshiva should pay towards the music lesson. The point is, I'm not suggesting that these stories, each and every one of them, is meant to be applied to each and every case at all. I think the most important thing you need to know about anything the Rebbe said is that unless the Rebbe said this applies in every situation, which I don't know that he ever did, it doesn't. But I think you can extract certain principles and lessons, and they become patterns. And that's one of the things that I've done. I've collected a lot of, consistent reinforced themes. So with talent, you see it again and again. The Rebbe believed that the talent is your instrument to play Hashem's music in this world. So look into the way you were designed. Don't repress it. Don't deny it. Don't see it even as an ancillary part of you that you can either develop or not. Actually, to the contrary, when you're looking to make a difference in this world, lean into that talent, because that is the first place Hashem says, this is yours.
Right.
And
I love that. Talent is the instrument.
Is the instrument Hashem gave you to make divine music in this world. Yeah. Talent. Personality. Your personality says so much about the kinds of things you can bring to the world. If you have an ambitious personality, so use that ambition. If you have a humble personality, if you have an empathetic ear, there are so many different ways that your own personality can lead you towards where you need to be. Location was a major theme in the Rebbe's Torah. There's so many people from outside of Eretz Yisrael, leaders in England, you find this, leaders in Australia, leaders in South Africa who wanted to make Aliyah at some point, especially when everyone, gave their doomsday predictions about what would happen, for example, South Africa, but other places too. The Rebbe said, Bashkacha pratis, this is where Hashem brought you. This is where you need to be. Unless, if you weren't a leader, if you didn't have a position of influence, that's different. But if you had a position of influence, you'd be very hard pressed to get permission from the Rebbe to leave that position of influence. So much so, this is a really funny story. I included in Seeds of Wisdom 1 or 2. Someone really, I don't want to say his name, but he was Rosh Yeshiva, or he managed Yeshiva somewhere, and he wanted to leave. He had enough. He got no gratitude. To the contrary, people in communal positions are very, very often extremely overworked, underappreciated. Next time you see one of them, please give them a hug, say thank you. But so this he had it, and he came to the Rebbe, and he had a yechidus. It so happened, I think, that the yechidus was after 12 at night, and so the Rebbe said to him like this. The Rebbe said that the Shver used to say, that the hour between 12 and 1 is a narish shah. It's a foolish hour. I don't know what the context is, but the Rebbe said, "Azan narishkeit." But such foolishness that you want to leave your position, I never heard it before. It's just a really interesting expression. But the theme is the same to so many people. Unless, if for whatever reason you do need to move, you need to have a replacement that's at least at your caliber, etc. So location is a really important point. And this is critical because sometimes we say to ourselves, you know why I moved to here, let's say to Miami or in London or whatever. Every place, people who move there will tell themselves, I moved here because of this reason, that reason, and so on. That's the human story. That's the human narrative. But there's a much deeper reason you moved there. And that's because there are sparks and tzitzis that the Eibusher planted in certain parts of the world that are drawing you, for you to elevate them. Once you look at reality from that vantage point, everything changes. Because really, from a spiritual point of view, reality is the combination of human initiative and divine providence. It's at that intersection of initiative, of ishtadlos and hashgacha pratis. That's where the magic happens. So look into yourself. Also your passions. Why is one person passionate about education, another person passionate about relationships, another person's passionate about dagunas, another person's passionate about child abuse? Everyone, they're touched by different things, even if they're not affected by it emotionally or directly. Why? That's Hashem saying this is part of your mission. There's a girl, it's an amazing story. She grew up in Crown Heights. She loved cats. Her parents really didn't like cats. She once was, I think, playing with a cat on Kingston Avenue, and the Rebbe was walking, it was Shabbos, and the Rebbe looked at her, and she was afraid, because at home she had learned that cats are, and the Rebbe gave her the biggest smile. She felt so good about it. She felt that it's the Rebbe basically encouraging this particular pastime of hers. Anyhow, long story short, in high school she needed to write an essay, and she wrote to the Rebbe, I have nothing to write about. So the Rebbe writes to her, if I'm not mistaken, you have a strong affinity for animals. Remember that could you imagine? The Rebbe said, I would recommend that you write an essay based on the Torah wisdom about Tzar Balachayim, how to look after animals in the best way possible. It's an amazing story. Not only the sensitivity of it, but what is the Rebbe doing here, to my mind? It's mind-blowing. The Rebbe says, your soul, you didn't just stumble on a cat. There's a reason that you connect to animals. That's because that's how Hashem designed you. It must mean, therefore, that this is one place to look to when you're trying to decipher what your purpose in life is. And there's many others. The Rebbe spoke a lot about your vices. Your vices, the things you keep struggling with internally, spiritually, morally. There are certain things every person has, and that's the thing that they argue with and they fight with and they wrestle with the whole life. And at some point they say, enough is enough. Genugshen. When am I going to graduate? When am I going to upgrade? When do I annihilate? One person struggles with anger. Another person struggles with arrogance. Another person struggles with, everyone struggles with their things, impatience. So again, they'll tell you the reason why, and it's not necessarily untrue, but it's only true at a certain level. In other words, okay, you know why you struggle with defensiveness, because when you were a child, your parents didn't validate you, and you always felt insecure. Your parents weren't home and they weren't present. So from a psychological point of view, that might be sound. But then the question is, but why were you born into a family to such parents who weren't present in this way? That's because this is very difficult. It's very easy to say and extremely difficult to practice. And it's very easy for me to say about others, much more difficult for me to practice with myself. This is because this is part of your story. This is part of your story. So instead of walking around with life and saying, if I could press a button and delete a particular person from my life experience, or delete a particular event, etc., this particular perspective helps us understand that that would mean that a part of your story is missing. And actually, very often, a very integral part, an essential clue that directs you towards your purpose in life. That's a very deep idea. It's a transformative idea. It can change one's life if internalized. That's in terms of vices and events. Then there's also mistakes. There's an amazing part of the book which talks about mistakes.
Yes. Okay.
It's incredible. The Rebbe told, this is something I was looking for a long time, because I remember hearing Rabbi Lipsker share this, and I included it in the draft. And Baruch Hashem Kahas, they have a very rigorous review process, which is incredible. And I was challenged.
Can I give a shout out to my brother-in-law,
Absolutely.
Yossi Friedman?
Amazing.
And my nephew, Yumi Berkowitz.
Absolutely. They're wonderful. And Mendel Lane.
Yeah.
They're an amazing team.
My nephew, that's just 2 years younger than me.
Wow. So that's an amazing thing about
they're a great team, aren't
they're a
they?
great team. And I appreciate the rigor because that's essential when it comes to the Rebbe's Torah. You have to have everything sourced. So anyhow, I later saw a video of the Rabbi Lipsker sharing this point. That, as you know, he started Aleph, which is for Jewish prisoners, and they came to Farbrengen at one time. It's very interesting, Rebbe's sensitivity. Rebbe made sure that they weren't all congregated in the same place because people would ask and they would learn that they were prisoners. But then the message the Rebbe shared with them, I'm paraphrasing, but the essence of it was that there are certain places that are so dark, that only select souls can be sent there by Hashem to redeem, to rehabilitate. And the Rebbe spoke about the idea that in Torah we do not find a punishment called prison. And that's because, from the spiritual point of view, prison is considered to break a cardinal principle. If the ideas of a einish is for rehabilitation, in other words, part of a cleansing process, a redemptive process, prison falls outside of redemption. It's a fascinating idea because you're stripped of the one thing that makes us human and created in the divine image, which is our free will. The short of it is, the Rebbe then says, essentially, that these individuals who end up in prison are there on a mission from Hashem to elevate that state of being, that state of mind, and that kind of environment. In other words, and this is me paraphrasing, a person who ends up in prison can say to themselves, I know I am in prison because I made this and this mistake, and I got caught. And that's not untrue. But the deeper question is, yes, but why did you gravitate to that life, and why were you caught? Now, this doesn't abdicate them from full 100% responsibility for what they did. That's par for the course. But the question is, there's always a deeper question within the question, which is not why me, but what now? What does Hashem want me to do in this given situation? So those are mistakes, and there are other very interesting examples.
We looked at that chapter right before you came in. It's even more so what something even more powerful can come out of that. I'm saying, besides what now, it's more like something more than what if this mistake never happened,
right,
well, can happen.
Yes, exactly.
If you work on it and develop it.
There's a different example there of a woman. I know this story firsthand because I asked her. I didn't include her name because for obvious reasons. But she, in the 70s, she went off to the Far East and she got involved in all kinds of religious practices, spiritual practices, including like bona fide avodah zarah. And circumstances, we say, of course, Hashgacha Pratis brought her to Crown Heights, and she wrote to the Rebbe at some point that she wanted to share her, she didn't want to be there under false pretenses, everything. So she wanted to share what her past was like, and she wrote there that she I'm paraphrasing again, something to the effect that she feels like she wasted a piece of her life, and not only that, she didn't just waste it. She didn't just not advance her purpose in life. She actually compromised and violated her purpose in life by engaging in I think it was hardcore avodah zarah, it seems. And the Rebbe wrote to her something mind-blowing. The Rebbe said to her, so you already practiced and fulfilled via gaita? If so, now you're ready for the matzasa. So we know one of the Pizgam and one of the sayings, one of Divrei Chazal, that yagaito, if you toil and you don't succeed, do not believe an individual. If someone says, I've succeeded without toil, don't believe them. But if someone says, I toiled and I succeeded, you should believe them. So in the Hebrew, yagaita means I toiled, and matzah says I discovered, or I found, or I actualized. So the Rebbe says the toil you already performed, meaning all that time that you were off in the Far East searching for something deeper and something more authentic, you were engaging in a process of yagaita, which is what led you here to your matzasa, to your newfound depth of understanding and connection to spirituality and the Eibusher. It's not just poetic, because what the Rebbe, if I understand correctly, is diagnosing as something very, very, very true and very real. This is a woman who, had she not gone to the Far East, had she lived what at the time her communal version of Judaism was, which was a very, very disengaged, socialite kind of Judaism, she never would have ended up in 770 learning Chassidus, going deeper, and building a beautiful from Chassidus Shalom. It never would have happened, because she would have continued marching along mindlessly along that path of mediocrity and spiritual complacency. So the fact that she was drawn to something deeper and she ended up engaging in something deeper recognizing its limits only to then go deeper and find the truth is itself part of the journey. It's a very deep story because many times we tend to compartmentalize different aspects of our life into the useful and the useless, or the things I wish I'd never done, or the place I wish I'd never been, or the people I wish I never met, and then the rest of us. Or this is my life path, and then this was an aberration from my life's path. The Rebbe is saying to do that is to basically turn to the author of your life and to say, I like certain bits, but I don't like others.
Yeah. It's so interesting because I've heard quite a few times people who have been through the yeshiva system and Chabad as well, is that we weren't really trained to become this person, let's say, to be successful in the area that I'm successful in. These are largely successful people. And it's like, I'm successful despite the fact that I didn't get a yeshiva education. I think it's very interesting because you're a now best-selling author. Your book is sold out and clearly a good writer. And I feel like that's one of the things to be a successful author is like you would imagine that having a background in like literary education, like learning this craft is essential. Yet, forgive me if I'm wrong.
Right, you're not wrong. I was born and raised in New Haven, Connecticut. So there's the New Haven Hebrew Day School, and which I finished at age 10, fourth grade. That was the limit of my secular education. I went to Torah, which is where I learned many other things, but definitely not the English language, to put it mildly. And the reality is that I did read a lot, and I think, writers, I think essentially people who write are most impacted by what they read, rather than the sort of formal English lit education they might get in their schools. But the reality is when I got married, I decided I really wanted to do this. It's a bit of a longer story. The short of it is that I started to notice a pattern in the Rebbe's Torah, where the Rebbe, basically redeems individuals or events of Jewish history that were considered irredeemable, and just manages to reconstitute and render them extremely valuable individuals or events that offer something incredible to Jewish history and to Jewish thought, etc. To anyone from the Esav to the Meraglim to Kairach. The list is, I have a list of 90 or 100 sources. So my idea at the time was I wanted to write a book just on that. The Rebbe's positivity bias with the Torah. It ended up evolving as I learned more, and I began to see that this is not just a Torah-specific concept, but this is a concept that was ubiquitous in all areas of the Rebbe's thought. Anyhow, at the time, I hired an editor, a lovely guy. His name was Matisyahu Brown. Give him a shout out. He lives in Eretz Yisrael, and I went to see him 2 or 3 times a week, and I would share a piece of writing. He would critique me, and I spent a few years doing that. That's how you do it. So, I think the point is that if you have a desire to do something, you'll find a way. And I think... And
that every step of the journey was essential in getting to where you... Because there's certainly... There must be something that you gained from that world that you were able to bring into your book that maybe you wouldn't have... like the divine kind of lens into the book. So I feel like it's very full circle.
Living a divine life to write a divine book.
So I'm saying it's like
there's
many pieces to the puzzle.
I was learning from a divine teacher.
Yeah. Right.
I think that's what I would say. A lot of the things that I've written are not. None of it is my own. So that's the beauty of it. I'm so lucky that, in life, if you want to just attach yourself to greatness, and in my case, all of us, we are the most lucky group of people on this planet that we were born into a tradition and into a community and with a Rebbe that just maps out reality for us.
But also what you're saying is that even if someone wasn't born into it and they feel like there's 100%. So much lost time.
100%. 100%.
It's not really lost time. I just wanted to bring up a point from before that you were saying that you wish the Rebbe was here now because you feel like he would, we all wish the Rebbe was here now, of course, yes, may Mashiach come. You were saying that you feel like the Rebbe would be saying something to today's generation, perhaps different to before, but if you've been researching all these themes and there are even things that you haven't even put in your book, wouldn't all these things that you're sharing now be what he would share now?
100%. 100%. I think in reality, it's all there. There's a saying in Pirkei Avos, hafachba v'hafachba dekulaba. Turn it over and turn it over, for it's all there. That's a fact. Everything is there. Sometimes something's there and you don't see it. And we, Baruch Hashem, have some great teachers and leaders in our community who do see it and are able to create the language. They're able to show you what you are looking at that you didn't know what you were looking at. I think that's a critical point. But then there are certain areas that, and maybe it's a conversation for a different time. There's so much emphasis on healing and well-being. And, I'm sometimes curious about
what the Rebbe would say about that. Yeah.
That's one of the things I did not write about because I don't have clarity on it, if I'm being very honest. I before every book, I go to many of the mashbiim and the, what we would call the public intellectuals of Chabad. And I try to get a sense from them if what I'm writing is aligned, if they disagree, if they think I'm getting it wrong. And I try to refine my writing based on these incredible, geniuses who were there, were present.
Yeah.
From Rabbi Yossi Jacobson to Rabbi Simon Jacobson to Yossi Baltiel to many others. And this particular area, I do not have clarity. That's why I did
on the healing generation.
Yeah, and the short of it is, I think that it falls into the category of Ein Nili Mili. This is my personal little take, which is that there's a lot of people who are spending a lot of time focusing on their inner world, and specifically the trauma, the pain that they went through. And to the outsider, it sometimes looks like that's perhaps twofold. It's excessive. In other words, one is so preoccupied with himself and healing, but what will be with what they need to bring to the world, right? And some would even argue that that wasn't the Rebbe's gang in a certain sense, where the Rebbe helped people move past and said, okay, now what are you going to do with it? So what's the right balance? So I think that if I'm not for myself, who will be? There's a lot of young people who they're not surviving. One could say that their souls are so sensitive. They're feeling things that were present for thousands of years. They're feeling the pain of Jewish history. Or there's many ways to look at it, and that's what they're going through. And so the first step has to be healing. You can't be an effective shliach of the Eibishter if you're not healed, if you're not complete within yourself. But then, after that, immediately, then what do we say? But if I'm only for myself, then what am I? And I think that's, to my mind, a frame to help us navigate this really difficult time where so many young people are struggling to the point of paralysis and overwhelmed with things like anxiety and trauma and pain and all those things that we didn't speak about in earlier times. So, some would argue that this itself is just the next frontier before the Gula. This is the excavation of all the toxicity that was pushed down and ignored for the longest time, that's now coming to the surface for us to be able to address and heal, and in so doing, Be'ezras Hashem, become the best versions of ourselves and the best ambassadors of the Eibishter to play his music and bring our world across the finish line of history once and for all.
Well, your answer was in the question.
Thank you.
So we normally like to wrap up with a quote, a snippet of wisdom, something that we can wrap things up with.
So there's a story, and this is the story that really gives me energy when I need energy. It's the story of a person. I heard this from the person who heard it from the person who it happened with. There was somebody who was from a non-Chabad background. He really needed help, and he contacted the Maskiras for Yechidus, and he was told, the typical, come back in 8 months at 2 a.m. And he then found out from one of the Bachrim that there's a way to circumvent protocol, and you can actually ambush the Rebbe on his way from his house to the car in the morning on his way to 770, and there's no vetting process, so he did that. The next day he shows up, and as the Rebbe comes out of his house, he stops the Rebbe and he spends 6-7 minutes explaining his predicament. The Rebbe answers him, and then the Rebbe goes into his car. Unbeknownst to him, there were 2 Bachrim across the street who were observing all of this, and they marched across the street and they confronted him and they admonished him, and they said, how dare you steal the Rebbe's precious time? There's a system. Anyway, he felt terrible. So he sat down, he wrote a note to the Rebbe of apology. And he said, I apologize for doing what I did. I didn't realize the extent of this violation. Could you forgive me? And the Rebbe responded with 2 points. The first point was, the time that those yeshiva barchim accosted you was actually during Seder Yeshiva. So they had no business being there. In other words, don't take it with a grain of salt. But the second thing the Rebbe said was, the Rebbe shared the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, that a soul can come into this world and spend an entire lifetime, very often filled with upheaval, turmoil, and spend an entire lifetime when we're talking about a frum Jew of Torah and mitzvahs. And yet the purpose, the real reason, the singular reason that they came to this world was in order to do one favor for another. And the Rebbe said, who knows? Perhaps the reason my neshama came to this world was to help you this morning. Wow. That's an incredible story. And furthermore, to my mind, that's the way the Rebbe viewed every single encounter, as perhaps this is the one. The Rebbe actually, I later saw at a Farbrengen and spoke about this particular point and said, imagine one lived with this idea throughout their life. How purpose conscious would they be? How purpose aligned would they be? That was the Rebbe describing himself, essentially, to my mind. Now, most of us will never be able to live that degree of being switched on to purpose. It's a very high level. But we can allocate some time, every day, every week, a purpose hour, whatever it might be. We're in that time frame. We're completely switched on to our purpose. And that becomes the clarifying and crystallizing manifestation of our life's mission on this earth. So that story for me is something that helps when I feel I don't have it in me, because that's a story that helps you dig deeper, because it says perhaps this is the one, if this is the one.
Yeah.
So that's a story. And the one line I would say, which really, 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 if someone asked me what's the entire book in one sentence, because our chachamim were geniuses at speaking in short words. I like to say that Pirkei Avos was the first book of sound bites. If you think about it, that's a whole book. It's a way of life. So the line is, it's a paraphrase. When I'm asked, I don't think it's a literal quote. It's a paraphrase, but it's something that is in every page of the Rebbe's talks, almost literally. And that is that the day you are born is the day Hashem decided the world can't exist without you. And that essentially is a message that our generation needs more than any other time. As the Rebbe diagnosed just in the early years of the Nesius, the overarching the Yetzer Hara of our generation is the question, Mi ani uma ani. Who am I? What am I? In such a vast world, and today through smartphones, the world is vaster and getting ever vaster in an exponential manner. It's all there. All of its problems, all of its issues, all of its opportunities are right there in the palm of your hand. In that kind of a reality, a person can say to themselves, what does little me matter to the grander scheme of life, of the universe of history? And this is the Rebbe's point. As the Rebbe later taught Rabbi Gerari, a mashpia, who asked the Rebbe, what should be my main message to the students? And the Rebbe told him, it should be the words of the Rambam, who says that one should always see the world and history as equally balanced between good and bad, where one single act can tip the scale for the better. That's the Rebbe's antidote to mi ani uma ani. And I think that that's where a lot of people struggle today, and that was the main inspiration for trying to put together something that would convey the Rebbe's teachings and perspective on how to find and live a life of purpose.
Wow. That's a beautiful message. The next thing we do can be that tipping point. And,
it's
and
radical.
change
It's
everything.
radical.
Yeah.
Again, to live that way every moment is extremely difficult. But if you
Just
know
the
it,
awareness. The
yeah,
awareness.
and also here's the point: in those critical moments of personal challenge and temptation, and where then if you can apply that, then you'll be good, because you realize what the stakes are. There's so much to be spoken about. There's a chapter that talks about Yosef. How did you really, the biblical story of temptation, overcoming temptation is Yosef. And according to the Chacham, it was touch and go. What caught him? What caught him was
his father's face,
which is a very powerful lesson in chinuch. But the Rebbe has an incredible sikha here, because the Gemara says that the face of Yaakov looked like the face of Adam Rishon. Shufrei, the Yaakov was like Shufrei, was like the face, the appearance, the visage of Adam Rishon. What does that mean, and how is that relevant? The Rebbe says something so powerful. When Yosef saw the face of his father, he saw into the face of Adam. He understood that he could live this moment as a private citizen, whose actions matter only to himself, or he can live out this moment as a historic moment, like Adam Harishon, who failed to realize the catastrophic, history-shaping effect and impact, the cosmic proportions of that particular Nisayan. And when he internalized that, and he understood what the stakes were in relation to Adam's failing, that motivated him to overcome his particular moment of temptation. So when a person, sometimes Yosef had very good reasons to say, even halachically, because she threatened his life. So the Rebbe once pointed out, it was at that time, the idea of Yahareg val Yaver, that you should die rather than sin, didn't exist. So he should have, according to halach, if he would have opened up a Shulchan Aruch, it would have said, yes, you have every right to, because this will be your means of survival. You don't want it, but you have to survive. So halachically he had a basis to do this, but he didn't. Why? Because he recognized sometimes you have to close the Shulchan Aruch, and you have to realize what are the odds, what are the stakes. And if you can imagine that one act can tip the scales, there's no act that mirrors that or reflects that as the act of Adam Rishon himself, that will help you get through these difficult moments.
Yeah.
Anyhow.
I also like those moments you shared in your book also, that all the souls that are around us, like whoever we interact with,
That's a powerful idea.
they're meant to be here with us for a reason. Those
Yeah.
people that are with us a lot of the time, even moments that we spend with
Yes.
random people.
And very often the most difficult people in our lives.
Yeah.
The people there's a letter there, which was for bringing. I'm so sorry about the time.
Okay.
There's a man who wrote to the Rebbe about Shalom Bayis issues. Clearly, it wasn't his first rodeo. He was like, the Rebbe received many letters from him. And clearly, again, just to
translate, Shalom Bayis issues means
domestic, strife and an absence of harmony at home. And again, I wanted to stress that the Rebbe was speaking to this particular individual, because when you talk about relationships and hadracha in terms of relationships, especially in terms of marriage, I think it's very important to at least state that there are times when this wisdom does not apply.
Right.
And there are times when one should seek guidance on actually how to move on from a relationship if it's so toxic and abusive, etc. Ask your local mashpia.
Mm-hmm.
But back to the story, the Rebbe basically tells him like this. The Rebbe says, we know at this point, based on our result, that every soul who's comes into this world today is a Gilgal, has been here before. Or maybe by and large. Maybe with very few exceptions, Rebbe says. I just want to be very careful with the quoting. It's in here.
I didn't realize every single soul is a Gilgal.
Almost, like something.
Almost.
It's in here. I can show it to you a little later. The Rebbe says, and why does the neshama come to this world? Because it's coming back to complete something it didn't do in a previous lifetime. And the Rebbe says, the greatest challenge in this lifetime is often the indicator as to what it is they need to complete and rectify from a previous lifetime. And the Rebbe says, therefore, if a person's greatest challenge is, in other words, Rebbe was saying, is not directed at Torah and mitzvahs, shmiras ha-mitzvahs, that's because in a previous lifetime they performed the mitzvah properly. But if their greatest challenge relates to those areas of psyche and personality that are as yet unrefined and unresolved, and in particular Shalom Bayis, it's because, and this is me now rendering what the Rebbe is saying, their neshama in a previous lifetime did not fulfill its purpose in relation to Shalom Bayis. So essentially, if we can say what was happening, the Rebbe was telling this person pretty clearly, you know why your soul came back into this world? Nothing to do with Torah mitzvahs. You did Torah mitzvahs in a previous lifetime. But because in a previous lifetime you didn't live the Shalom Bayis. That's why you're here. Don't you understand why it's so difficult? This is the reason. This is your purpose. And it's very rare for the Rebbe to
So the very thing that you're struggling with is the
tikkun.
the purpose.
Wow. That's it. That's another chapter. Exactly that. The thing you're showing. I find that to be a really incredible.
That is insightful.
I can't wait to properly read the book. Sounds fascinating.
Well, thank you very much
Thank you
for
so
coming.
much.
It's a pleasure. And
You should have a lot of success.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And it should reach far and wide.
Thank you very much. And I think for many people that are not yet sure about their purpose, but for both of you, I think at least part of your purpose is so evident in this incredible conversation and conversations and this podcast, that you basically take wisdom and you share it with the widest audience possible. I'm sure you don't even realize the extent of your impact. I'm certain of that. And so may Hashem bless you to continue to use your tremendous skill sets and your abilities to become a platform and a conduit for life-affirming and life-giving wisdom that will, Mirz Hashem, bring healing and redemption and all good things to so many.
Same to you with your work and spread far and wide and sold out. So it's a testament to its impact, and you should have continued success.
Thank you very much.